All right, let's turn our attention to another protest, but a completely different one this time around. The Democratic Alliance, led by John Steenhuisen, picketing at the Bryntirion ministerial residence. This is in Tshwane this morning, and they are protesting over what they describe as ANC cadres living like rock stars. Now, the official opposition says the country's ministers who have brought the economy to its knees are the very same people right now who are isolated from the crises that this country is experiencing, including load shedding. Let's speak now to Ziyanda Ngcobo, who is out in Tshwane this morning. Ziyanda, good morning to you. What is the leader of the main opposition saying exactly about the lifestyles of these ministers?
Well, basically, John Steenhuisen today saying that there are two worlds that exist in South Africa. There's the real world that you and I probably live in, and the one that cabinet ministers live in. And interestingly, or maybe startlingly, one of the revelations made by Dr. Leon Schreiber today was that they've put in a legal challenge for the ministerial handbook in its current form, and that the public protector, should have been investigating this as far back as 6 months ago. And they're claiming that it's illegal. But let's bring in John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance. There's a for sale sign behind you there, because basically you're saying that the ministers are basically shielded and are out of touch with the South African populace. What are you going to do in particular with this cut the perks bill that you've spoken about today?
Yeah, so as you said, these ministers live in a different world. This estate behind me is a golf course, 15 tennis courts, swimming pools, a basketball court, manicured lawns. Completely out of touch with the reality of life, and it's protected 24 hours by SAP. So it's little wonder the President and this cabinet don't take crime seriously. So what we want to do is to bring oversight and accountability in terms of the ministerial handbook. Currently, the President has carte blanche to write into that what he wants. And as we saw last year under the cover of darkness, he slipped in the free generators, free water and free electricity. That cannot be right. That needs to be brought to Parliament, and there needs to be proper oversight of these particular benefits so that we can ensure that there's transparency and accountability. It is grotesque that in a country with 42% unemployment, a country with 30 million people who live in poverty, that we have ministers living it up like rock stars in cabinet world, far removed from the real world.
So how long will it take to push through with this private members bill?
Well, we will obviously be tabling it by the end of this parliamentary session, but we want to actually make sure that it's done. But the short circuit here, of course, is to vote for a DA government. Then we can put the for sale sign up here for real and get this thing sold and make sure that we are able to use the money on the people of South Africa, not the politicians.
So DA ministers would not live at Bryntirion, ministerial residence?
DA ministers living in Bryntirion. And here's the thing. I think it would be far more cost effective to move to a subsidy system where if you're required to have a residence in Cape Town, there's a subsidy for you. I think it will also be good for ministers to live in real communities, to face the daily challenges that ordinary South Africans face. You can have your security, provided there's a security threat, but use the roads that people do. Travel the way that other people travel. See what real world is like here, and you'll see how far it's removed from the cabinet world that you've been living in.
Mr. Steenhuisen, this morning the President in his weekly letter said that it's unfortunate that the announcement of the two new ministers has been reduced to a head-counting exercise, and that it's not looking at the purpose for which then he has increased his cabinet, even going as far as saying that when he came in, there were 34 ministers, he reduced it to 28, and now it's gone to 30, but fit for purpose, basically.
30 and 36 deputy ministers, and he's now got more deputy ministers than Jacob Zuma had. This is not a president who's serious about cutting the size of his cabinet down at all, and he's had to bring in another minister because the other two ministers have failed so spectacularly to do their job. Now he's layering another minister on top of that. So now you're going to have 4 ministers hacking around over the electricity crisis. You're going to have Pravin Gordhan, Gwede Mantashe, Sputler, and now the new Minister of Cooperative Governance, who's in charge of the disaster management regulations. The thing we needed here was less ministers. Bring in the private sector, bring in people who have energy expertise, people who have done these processes before. Layering more ministers on is not going to solve the problem, and all the President's trying to do is consolidate more and more power in his grand presidency, where there's little oversight of it, and he's not really serious about changing the electricity crisis. And as you've seen, neither is the new minister. He said, no new plans, nothing to see here, business as usual.
Mr. Steenhuisen, on a completely different note, while I have you, this weekend we saw reports of the interim report by the Public Protector, which has basically absolved the President of the Phala matter. We know that her scope, she's limited by the Executive Members Ethics Act. But your reaction to this and any possible further action?
Well, I'm sorry it's been leaked because it is an interim report, and I think the President and his advisors are being a little bit celebratory. It's not the final report yet, and reports have been subject to change. I think it's a misunderstanding, without going into too much detail, of the nature of the complaint we raised, which was the use of the Presidential Protection Unit to pursue the theft of money in the President's private business operation. I don't think that that's right, particularly as no case number was opened and no authorization from SAPS was received for that investigation and recovery to take place. So I think that there is a conflict of interest between Cyril Ramaphosa, the businessman, and Cyril Ramaphosa, the President. And I don't think that the Public Protector, as I read it, has appreciated that. So obviously we'll wait for the final report. If we're unhappy with it, we will definitely seek a review of it. Over 90% of the Public Protector's reports have been taken on review in the last few years, and almost all of them have been overturned. But we will first go through the process of making the representation, pointing out where we think the misunderstanding has happened, and see if it's rectified in the final report.
Just lastly from my side, News 24 is reporting that the SIU is investigating one minister, Ngcobo, for possibly having gotten her qualifications unduly. So we're talking about ministers, we're talking about the lifestyle they lead, we're standing in front of the ministerial residence. What do you have to say about this?
Well, I think it's unfortunate. These things are not a requirement for office. So why people would go to the lengths that they are to forge these things is frankly beyond me. It's not necessary. And I think it points to a massive insecurity, clearly, in these ministers with their own abilities. I think that she's not the only one facing trouble in that cabinet. You've got Gwede Mantashe, who's been acknowledged in the Zondo Commission report. You've got Nomvula Mokanyana in the NEC. So there's very little appetite to take action against anybody for wrongdoing, provided you're in close proximity to the President. I've always said ANC, absolutely no consequences. And I've no doubt in this case it's going to be the same.
2024 campaigning underway, clearly then by Mr. John Steenhuisen. We saw the President in KwaZulu-Natal at the weekend, also, tying the shoelaces of journalists. DA leader here putting up a for sale sign. 2024, quite a long journey ahead of us, Xoli, but certainly some pertinent issues needing to be dealt with. So that private members bill going to be tabled by the Democratic Alliance to cut the perks of ministers, saying that they need to live in the real world like you and I.
Ziyanda, Ngcobo, thank you very much for that update.